The Holy Gospel according to Mark is found in the 7th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups and pots and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. Magic mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest of them all? The evil queen in Walt Disney's Snow White was obsessed with her mirror. And why not? This wasn't just any mirror, you know, it was a magic mirror. Each day she would come before the mirror, summon the mysterious slave trapped within, and ask her question. And each day she would get the same answer. "You, O queen, are the fairest in the land." The queen accepted his answer, not because she was sure of her own beauty. If she was, why would she keep on asking the question? But because the slave in the mirror had to tell the truth. But then one day things changed. She came as always and asked, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And she was shocked at the answer. "A lovely maid I see, rags cannot hide her gentle grace. Alas, she is more fair than thee." This time, when the mirror spoke the truth wasn't so easy to handle. Mirrors are so much a part of our everyday life that we probably take them for granted. And it isn't just mirrors that reflect our images. We live in a world filled with all kinds of shiny surfaces, plate glass windows, shiny cars. Everywhere we look, we see ourselves looking back at us. Of course, it hasn't always been this way. Until recently, many people lived their whole lives without ever catching more than an occasional glimpse of themselves. And the image they saw wasn't very clear. Unless you were one of the very rich, you had to be satisfied with distorted reflections in water or in a fragment of polished metal. You might live your whole life and never really know what you looked like. This distorted image is what James is talking about in today's second reading. But he isn't referring to physical appearance. James is concerned with our awareness of our character, of our vices and virtues. Despite the advances in the quality of mirrors, my guess is that the view we have of our souls is probably just as blurred and uncertain as the image of the physical self was back when mirrors were a luxury. Just as we might prefer a mirror that shows our body in soft focus, perhaps taking off a few pounds here or there, we probably also prefer a view of our souls that smooths out the wrinkles and covers up the spiritual blemishes. A really good mirror is dangerous. Just like the magic mirror in Snow White, It tells the truth, even when it isn't what we want to hear. Our self-delusions are far easier to live with. The Pharisees in today's gospel are a good example of this. They take a quick look at themselves and their world and only see a few external things, whether people have washed their hands according to ritual, for example. And based on this, they assume they know all they need to know. But Jesus says, not only are they missing the truth about others, they haven't really seen themselves clearly either. They look squeaky clean on the outside, but the inner truth is different. They miss the bad things in themselves and the good things in the world around them. And as a result, they think they have life all figured out. They can avoid the challenges they ought to face and use their religious power to lay unbearable burdens on others because of imagined flaws. Whatever it is that they're seeing when they look in the mirror of their lives, it certainly isn't the truth. It's a universal human tendency to see things as we want to see them rather than as they are. So where can we find a mirror that tells us the truth we really need to hear? A mirror that shows us ourselves as we really are. And if we find it, how can we find the courage and strength to look into it and see what it shows us and not shy away from the truth of our reflection? James says if we want to see how things really are, we need to look into the perfect law of liberty. What is that perfect law, the law that sets us free? It's love. The Bible tells us that love is the fulfilling of the law. Learning that we are loved by God and letting that love spill out onto others gives us a clear vision of ourselves. It also gives us a clear vision of our world and those around us, because we are learning to see the world as God sees it. If the Pharisees had looked at the world and at themselves in the light of love, rather than through the harsh lens of their rules and regulations, their lives would have been transformed. They were constantly anxious, always striving to be worthy. But if they had seen themselves as they were in God's eyes, they would have known that they were already treasured and precious, that God would not reject them because of their faults. If only they had known that, they would have been free to live lives of joy and service. And having seen themselves as they really were, they would be able to look at the lives of those around them with love as well. They would have seen that they were condemning people over insignificant trivialities and using their power to destroy rather than to build up. Imagine for a moment that you are looking into the eyes of God and seeing yourself reflected there. You have to linger a while. What happens when you look into the eyes of someone who loves you? You see not only your own reflection, but you also see their love for you. Looking at ourselves in the mirror of God's eyes, we see ourselves as we are. Yes, we see that we are flawed people with much to learn, but we also see God's endless love for us. Looking at ourselves in the perfect mirror of the love of God takes courage and time. It isn't always comfortable coming to a true appreciation of who we are. We might discover all sorts of self-delusions. We might see ourselves as strong and independent, but the truth might be that we're bossy, lonely, and intolerant. We might see ourselves as modest, humble, and easygoing. But the truth might be that we're unwilling to stretch ourselves, too scared to take any risk. We might see ourselves as insignificant, no good at anything. But the truth is that we are called, each of us, to shine as lights in the world. Coming close to God, lingering in God's presence, and looking into God's eyes helps us to see those sorts of truths, but it also reminds us that we're not condemned for our faults. Lingering with God, we hear the challenges, but we hear them spoken in love. God will not reject us no matter what we do or who we are. How do you see yourself when you look into God's eyes? What does that voice of love say to you to challenge and to reassure? We're strangers to ourselves, but to see ourselves spiritually as we really are is God's gift to us, a gift given in love. And this gift doesn't just apply to us as individuals, but can be used to see many things as they are. Think about atonement. Do we struggle with our self-image as a church? I think we do. We aren't who we used to be. We look to the past as the image of what we should be. Well, there's a little conflict in our past, and our sanctuary is not filled with children. We have some financial challenges. Looking at ourselves through the eyes of society and perhaps our own expectations, we might feel like we're failing. But what if we see ourselves through God's eyes? How does God see atonement? God sees us through the eyes of perfect love. God sees our love for each other. God sees our joy and as we worship and our love of music. God sees a congregation that is committed to feeding the homeless. God sees us as people who want to do so much, but who have to face the limitations of age and smaller numbers. But most importantly, God sees us and loves us, both as atonement and as individuals, and loves us just exactly as we are.